So, data science is changing the world. It's changing the way we process information. It's changing the way we are solving problems. It's changing the way we do businesses. However, it's not equally available to everyone. Large corporations have almost unlimited funds, have massive resources. They can hire the brightest people, and they use data science everywhere. Charities and government organizations, on the other hand, are often lagging behind. This is where data science for social good comes in. This is a program that was set up in 2013 at the University of Chicago by Raid Ghani, who is going to speak to us over internet in a few minutes. It's a very intense 12-week summer program that brings together the world's top students in data science with charities and government organizations to tackle data science problems with a social impact. It delivers, or it aims to deliver, a usable open source data product. And it's a program that is very diverse, highly interdisciplinary, problem-driven, and teamwork focused. And so it equips the participating students with all the key skills that will allow them to excel in their future career. In other words, this program uses the power of data science to make the world at least a little bit a better place. And it creates a community of like-minded people and organizations who care about our society and who are willing and able to use their skills in an ethical way. The program fits very well to the vision of the University of Warwick. The vision is to help transform our region, our country, and the world for a collective good. And so in 2019, data science for social good was brought to the UK for the first time by the University of Warwick together with the Alan Turing Institute. And it's been running every year, every summer since 2019. This gives Warwick a place among a small but growing network of global universities who are running similar programs. And I'm proud to work at a university that puts significant resources towards this program. But let me talk about this year's program. The most important criterion for a successful running of DSSG is certainly the fellows. And this year's 15 fellows have been selected from hundreds of applications that we got from all over the world in a very thorough process involving 2 rounds of interviews, one focusing on the technical skills and one focusing more on the social fit of the person. Earlier, I mentioned diversity and I mentioned interdisciplinarity, and I think that's perfectly reflected in this cohort. We have 11 women. The fellows come from 7 different countries, 4 different continents. They are enrolled in very different programs at the undergraduate level, at the master level, and at the PhD level. And they come from disciplines such as computer science, statistics, math, physics, business, epidemiology. So it's just like the real world. And we need all these different disciplines to work together to deliver data science for the social good. The other important criterion is obviously our project partners. And this year we had about 80 inquiries for possible projects. We went through a thorough scoping process with several partners, and we ended up selecting 4 projects to run this summer. And you will hear more about what we did exactly for our 4 project partners later in the talks from the fellows. Now, today is the highlight and closing session of this year's program, what we call the Datafest. However, what you see today is just the tip of an iceberg. What you can't see immediately is this really year-round effort that is needed to keep this program running. It starts with, for example, advertisement. We need to make people aware of the program so that they apply to work with us, the fellows, the partners, the technical mentors, and project managers. We need to raise funds. It seems given the benefits, this program is really great value for money. It's beneficial, highly beneficial for the fellows who participate. It's highly beneficial for the partners who benefit from the output of this project, and it's of great value to society as well. Still, we need to secure the money required to run this program. A lot of effort goes into talking to potential project partners, often charities with very little experience in data science, and we spend a lot of time helping them to define and scope projects that are suitable for a DSSG project. And of course, there's the selection of fellows I already mentioned, very thorough with several rounds of interviews. There's the recruitment of project managers and technical mentors, which we recruit every year within people with industry experience, because we want the students to also have an industry experience, and we want the output to have industry quality. Then there are legal contracts to be signed and many other small things to be done until finally we get to work on this intensive 12-week summer program, of which you see the culmination today's Datafest. You can imagine this is a huge amount of work, and we couldn't do it without the help and dedication of many, many people who volunteer their time and expertise. In fact, there are too many to name them, but I want to mention at least a few. The core Warwick organizer team, besides myself, that is Colm Connaughton, Maria Bazzi, Ludmila Grigorieva, and Long Tan Tran. All academics who support throughout the program and throughout the year. And then our fantastic program manager, Claire Roberts, who has been working with the fellows and with all the other teams at Warwick, be it in the finance, in recruitment, the legal team, the development team. There are lots and lots and lots of people who are involved behind the scenes in this program. There are also lots of volunteers outside Warwick from different organizations who volunteer their time, previous fellows who help with interviewing, with project scoping, etc., etc. And I would like to thank all these people for all the work that they put in. Special thanks, of course, go to our project managers, Satyam Bhagwanani and Valerie Lim, and our technical mentor, Mihir Mehta. They worked on a day-to-day basis with the fellows and supported them throughout, overcome all these small and big obstacles that you always face if you work with messy data on a real-world problem and you don't know exactly how it's going to go, etc. So they did an excellent job, and without them, definitely we wouldn't be here to present you these great results that we are going to present later. So thank you for that. Last but not least, I mentioned funding before, and obviously this program needs a lot of funding. It wouldn't be possible without the generous support of the University of Warwick, but also the Alan Turing Institute and Microsoft. And I would also like to thank Aridia and DataQuest, who allow us to use their platforms for free. Thanks to those organizations. Right, and with that, I would like to hand over to Raid Ghani, the original creator of the Data Science for Social Good program, now at the Carnegie Mellon University, and he will say a few words of welcome remotely from Pittsburgh. Hello, Raid.
Hi, Jürgen. Can you guys hear me okay?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, this is you know, I wish could be there in person, but unfortunately I couldn't make it this time. We just had our Datafest last week, so I'm recovering from that and getting ready for our semester to start. But I'm so happy to have all of you here and at least be able to join virtually. And there's a lot I can talk about, but I think I just want to sort of say three things. One, why programs like this are so critical and so necessary, not just for the students and for the organizations and for universities, but for our society. You know, these types of programs you're going to sort of see as you hear about the projects. At a very high level, you know, they make a lot of these buzzwords and overhyped things, machine learning, data science, AI, much more concrete for governments, charities, nonprofits that aren't quite sure how to use them. And I think one of the key pieces that a lot of these societal problems, the needs are very different. The technology needs are very different, and the training needs than you know, optimizing revenue for some useless company. And looking at, you know, the way I often talk about it is, you know, a government agency can fire a customer. And that means they have to serve everyone and they have to care about equity, whereas a company doesn't need to serve anyone. They're not profitable, just fire them. Now, that's true at a high level in terms of society and our values, but that embeds itself into the systems we develop, into the machine learning and AI systems. So these types of projects are so critical in highlighting that, training the students, in building their capacity, then go on and develop the solutions for the organizations, for the issues that we care about. So extremely critical, and I'm biased. I've been doing this for a long time, but hopefully, you know, a lot of you, if you're here for the first time, you'll see that. The second thing I want to reiterate, as Jürgen was talking about, is these programs are so difficult to run. What you see at the end is, you know, all the good stuff, but then there's all the work that we can talk about, right? Is putting the students together, making it exceptionally difficult for ourselves by having people come from different disciplines. It would be really easy if we pick people from the same background, of the same type, again, like in a tech company. But then we build solutions just like in a tech company, and that's not the point, right? The point is to build things that impact the world in a positive and equitable way, and that bringing in people from different disciplines, from different backgrounds, and that makes these programs really difficult to run. The tension between training people, but doing it in a way that they're actually solving problems, the hands-on piece and the training piece, and then having the project come in a way that they are reasonably well scoped before the summer even starts, to make it possible for the students to both be productive and learn. And the third thing I just want to end with, right, is because of those reasons, because these programs are so critical for our society, and because they're so difficult to run, we have to sort of figure out how to participate in more of this work. You know, and so in this case, you know, I'm extremely thankful for all the people who are here. You know, the fellows, the project managers, the mentors, the organizers, by being part of it, and those of you who are attending, by supporting this type of program, by funding it, by encouraging it, and perhaps more importantly, by engaging with it. You know, one thing I hope that those of you who are here attending don't take things at face value. I think it's important to kind of use data and evidence to do social good, but it's more important to do it well, to be scientifically rigorous about it, evidence-based about it. And I think, you know, so when you hear things from the fellows, question them, ask them about, you know, what's the evidence, because that's, you know, we want to make sure that what we're doing leads to impact, and that means doing it in a way that's scientifically rigorous, and making sure that we can back up all the things that we're doing. So again, thank you so much for you know, for being here. Thanks for organizing it and putting in all the effort, and thanks to all the fellows for spending the summer. Looking forward to hearing more about the projects, and yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much, Raid. It's always nice and inspiring to hear from you and why you created this program. So now I'm immensely pleased to introduce to you today's keynote speaker, Gaia Marcus. Gaia works as Head of Transformation in Corporate for Modernization and Reform at the Cabinet Office and was previously head of National Data Strategy at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, where she was responsible for delivering a national data strategy aiming to unlock the power of data in the UK economy and government, while building public confidence in its use. She's a trustee for Samaritans UK and has spent the majority of her career in the charity sector, specializing in tech for good, communities, and data strategy. To give you just one example, at Centrepoint, she delivered Centrepoint Helpline, the first ever national advice service for young people experiencing or at risk of homelessness, which is closely linked to one of the projects we have been doing. And the UK's first youth homelessness open data source. So with this background, I'm sure you agree, Gaia is the perfect keynote speaker for DSSG, and I'm very much looking forward to her talk. Gaia, please.
And I think I'm on. Am I on? Perfect. If the sound gets strange at any point, just wave at me.
I'm not sure the microphone is on.
Yeah, is that, am I coming through? Perfect. I will enunciate. Perfect. And I am on my phone because that is where my notes are. So there will be no tweeting from the pulpit. So look, thank you so much for having me here today. I ended up doing this talk, I think, through a slightly roundabout process whereby a minister's private office may not have properly communicated that I wasn't still head of national data strategy. However, I have worked in data and data for good in the charity sector for quite a while, so I thought maybe I could be a bit of use. So why data from good to data doing good? So my pitch is really that I want us to move from thinking of data as a noun and thinking of data as a verb. Moving away from kind of data projects being one-off to an ongoing focus of data, really thinking about as a country, we need to think about data as doing good instead of being a good output. And so yeah, from noun to verb, from one-off to ongoing, from kind of those hero data scientists, a lot of you are in the room, to data culture, from entrepreneurs fighting the good fight to organizations that are asking for data at all levels, and from individual pockets of thick data that's used well to having a system-wide lens. And while we do that, I'd like us to be open to the unintended consequences of data use and really ensure that our data use isn't just rigorous and scientific, but is actually doing good. So is live to the power dynamics. So what I've got is a point kind of thought, and what I've done with each point is I've illustrated it from something from my experience, and really just for questions, and if anything I say sparks a question or thought, just come back to me even if it's not really related. 5 points are here. Let's move from noun to verb. Let's have fewer data heroes, more data culture. Let's move away from these like one-off data moments, which are really important because they're often the aha moment, to having a plan for data, dare I say a strategy, from kind of our data to thinking about the system, and then some notes of caution. So just before I jump in, I think there's a split of organisations, charities. So who is everyone? Are you local authorities? Are there any, I saw a local authority, 2 local authorities, great. Charities, brilliant. Of the charities, who's a charity that has like solved data? Great, excellent, good. Otherwise, I'm not useful. Who is kind of midway through their data journey? Great. Foothills, like looking at data. Great. We'll work it. You don't have to doubt yourself. Great. And then of the students, who are our data fellows? Great. Excellent. Over here. And are there prospective data fellows in the room, like people that would like to? If you're not one of those categories, who are you? Who am I not talking to that I wasn't aware of? Okay, perfect. We've got our mentors. We've got our experts. Great. Hopefully there's something in here for everyone. It won't be too long though, so if I am boring, don't worry, I'll be over soon. So, noun to verb. I don't actually know if this works grammatically, but bear with me. So I was responsible for the National Data Strategy for 2.5 years. And there was a piece of text in the data strategy that I kept on having to reinsert. So I don't know if you've ever worked in like government or big organizations, but documents take a lot of doing, and there's multiple layers of sign off, and someone's always editing something. And I had this sentence that was just my kind of little flag to any person who'd actually had to be the data bod. Like, left alone, data doesn't sort itself out. And people kept on trying to take it out. It's quite colloquial for a government document. But what I really liked is that a data scientist, and he has actually said he's happy to be on the wall, I had anonymized him, noticed. So there were data people working in government that saw that sentence and noticed that there was someone involved in the writing of this policy document that had like the tiniest idea of how complicated it is to get to data that are good enough to actually do anything of worth with it. And so something that I really fought for in the National Data Strategy was having foundations as the pillar of effective use across the country, and the idea that government should be intervening or should consider whether or not it should intervene in data foundations and having data that are actually structured in ways that make sense, that are accessible and available. And whilst there was this thing of, oh, well, you know, maybe in the charity sector or across government that's important, the private sector are fine. They are not fine. There are some big companies that are fine. Everyone else is just held together through Excel sheets and sticky tape. So that's kind of my number one rule, no matter where you are. And I'm sure the data fellows will have seen this through their work this summer. There is no AI. I like this. I haven't quoted him because he didn't confirm that he was actually quoted. There is no AI before IA. I quite like that. Like, unless the data makes sense, unless they are structured, what are you gonna find out? Because even if you are able to draw conclusions, those conclusions will be invariably driven by the bias in the data. So this is my first thing. So we often talk, at least in the charity sector when I was there, about data quality as if it were a thing. You achieved data quality and then you walked away and the data quality was just there. And so when I say from data from kind of noun to verb, whether or not it actually works grammatically, good data, quality data are the result of an ongoing process that you can't stop, because the second you stop, it falls over. And so that's not my first thing, of like moving away from thinking about data as this kind of thing that you sort it out to the ongoing process. And so anyone building a data strategy that we will come to, this idea being, and this used to be a data strategy pyramid, that if anyone's had to do that, you'll recognize, do you have your data? Do you have the right people working on the data? Do you have the right protocols? But because it's a government document, someone flattened it because the strategy the pyramid didn't make sense. But this idea that actually, if you don't sort out the foundation, nothing else works. So 2, data heroes are very important. You're all data heroes. Stick being data heroes, but we do need to move from a system where you get someone to fly in, sort out the data, do a fun model and fly out, to the system's more about the data culture and about the way in which everyone within the organisation contributes to that. So I don't know if this is a very good image for blame, but let's pretend it is. So when I was working for Parkinson's UK, so I set up Parkinson's UK's 2017-2019 data strategy. And I didn't put it on the slide because it's a bit rude, but there's a thing people always say in data space, which is like crap in, crap out. I don't know if you come across this. Right. That just blames someone else. So I did a lot of user research in setting up the data strategy, and there was this thing that kept on coming up. So as often with charities, the part of the charity that did fundraising was the part that was most data advanced, which is often what happens because they bring in the money so they can justify the spend, right? And they'd say, oh, but the data is probably, I don't know. And it's IT's fault. And IT would say, but they're inputting the data. Like, it is people in their team that create the data. How is it? So I kind of followed the system around a bit. And then I ended up just sitting with people in the membership team. So they have supporters who call up and you write down their data. They didn't have a data dictionary. No one had told the people gathering the supporter data. So the data that created the money for the charity, nobody had thought to say, this is how we do names, this is how we do surnames, this is how we do addresses. So whenever anyone needed to use the data were awful, but because there wasn't this really basic thing of, they hadn't really thought about the person on the phone as being part of the data picture, which of course they are because they're your input. And so I think maybe less relevant for data scientists, but it's important to really think about when you're looking at a data set, who's created it and why. And then in charities, local authorities, this real question of, what is the system that generates the data? And does everyone at each stage understand that making data is everyone's business and using data? So in the same charity, you know, I'm working with one part of the charity and we're able to get a partnership with a big pharma that are using graph theory to find disease interactions between like certain molecules, like really great stuff. And then the foot soldiers of the charity that are talking to people with Parkinson's who are actually generating kind of new data are writing up Excel sheets in their car at the end of a shift from paper notes. And then there's one person on SharePoint trying to knit all the Excel sheets together. So there's really something about just a data mature organization is one where everyone is both thinking about the data, but then able to use it. And I think often in charities and local, there's this real split between those who create and then those who use. And as we go through this, it then at a societal level leads to what I'd say is a coordination failure in data. I'll explain what I mean on that. So, look, data heroes are really important. You know, you have people that have like the idea, the bright spark. We were talking earlier about finding that one team that does data and just giving them a toy. Look at this model, it helps you. And I've often been a data entrepreneur or worked for them, and you really create the space and you create the spark of the possible, and that is so important. But until the organization has I would say a strategy, but plan's good enough for how that data are going to be utilized, you have ideas that fizzle on the vine as soon as that person leaves. Like, I won't name the organization, but I worked for an organization where we'd done some great stuff and then weren't involved in the next year's budget. And then we were for 6 months, but no one lives off 6 months pay, right? So we ended up leaving. And it put the innovation work that we'd done back by years, because they had the entrepreneurs that were doing the work who then got annoyed at the working contracts, which happens. And then you shouldn't have a data system whereby it's so fragile that a couple of people leaving stops your project. There were some projects that were better embedded and they remained, but there is something about ensuring that by having a strategy for data, for thinking about your data basics, do you know how data are being created? So your really basic architecture, your capabilities, your governance, like who is responsible for the data? Is there a data board? Until you have all of those things, your data scientists can't trust the data they're dealing with. And as an organization, you haven't actually embedded something that's going to be sustainable. So I can talk about strategies forever. So if you want more thoughts on that, we'll do that offline because it's not interesting for everyone. This is something where I think it becomes really interesting for everyone. So most data is partial, and therefore once you've sorted out your organization is perfect. I think there are two things here. So as a data scientist, as someone working with the data, you should always be asking who's not in there. So I can't think of a better reference at the moment. There's the kind of like hidden figures style thing around like women not being in trial data. Everyone knows this example. I won't go into it, but I think there's that reminder. Like I used to be a network analyst. All the data that you're trained on is this somehow perfect world. So if you ever do network analysis, or maybe it's moved on a bit, you'll end up doing loads of studies of like smoking trends in teenagers in a high school, because that's like a closed system that you can throw your arms around. But obviously, most of life isn't that. And I think as a charity or as a local authority, and you should talk to each other, it's so important to think about the system that data are operating in. So when I worked for Centrepoint, we had a question, which was how many young people are homeless? There is no answer to that question, right? But literally, how many young people in the UK or England, because the systems are different, are homeless? Now, we tried a couple of routes. We wanted to FOI all local authorities, freedom of information request. They weren't that keen. We went through the central government department to begin with, really not keen on that. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up mapping out a young person's journey through homelessness. And we ended up basically working out and this is worth saying if anyone knows a lot about homelessness, this is before the Homeless Prevention Act. This is a while ago. But we ended up mapping out all the various touch points that we had and identifying where the majority of data were likely to be found. And through the mapping process, and that's where your user research with your data creators, data users, and beneficiaries is important, we identified two things. Firstly, most people were using a data model that was based on coalition fund that didn't exist anymore, which was the Supporting People Fund. But because everyone had spent loads of money getting the data systems in and structuring their data sets to fit with supporting people, no one changed. Why would you change your variables once in there? And the other was that people had the same data that they were sending to local authorities. And so we basically used the data that was being sent to local authorities and the data that local authorities collected through their homelessness assessment to create the basis of our data model incredibly basic CSV, aggregate level model. And now that data can still be found on Youth Homelessness Data Bank, where you can start comparing the amount of young people that turn up to charities, the amount of young people that that actually present to a local authority asking for help, but were not assessed. That's changed slightly in the kind of the years since, and then the amount of young people put into various categories. Now, that data set is incomplete. It always will be, but the data got more complete year by year, because for a start, if you work in an FOI team and you know that someone's going to ask you the same questions every year, you start recording it, because it's really annoying to have to do refusals and then go back and forth. And so we were able to at least have a partial picture that didn't tell us how many young people were actually homeless, but it did tell us that I think this must have been 2012, of the 13,580 who were seen as being eligible, unintentionally homeless and in priority need, and therefore housed who had legal duty, there was something like 130 to 150,000 asking for help. That doesn't answer the question of how many young people are homeless, but it does tell you something about the funnel. So that's, I think, the kind of thing. And actually, the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, has started some experimental statistics that's very similar to this, looking at the funnel of the data. And Scotland already does this because the data are better. But it's that thing of taking that system-wide approach helps you to understand what might be missing. And then I feel like I'm probably going a bit long. So, and the reason why this is so important, beyond the fact that we only have partial bits of data, most charities, not everyone represented today, but most people only have 5,000 clients, 10,000 clients. You're never really going to understand a problem or be able to show true evaluation of your interventions with such small data. Data is a good example of coordination failure, in that generally the costs are borne by the people who are creating the data, aren't necessarily people that gather value from using the data. And that's where kind of coalitions working together, big things like the Data Collective, can really help try and surmount these problems. So yeah, I feel like I've moved a bit too much. Finally, just ensuring data are doing good. So there are loads of frameworks. This is one for the public sector. But I think it's just worth remembering that you're always talking about, normally, most times, you're talking about someone's data. And that person doesn't always know that their data has been created about them, even if they gave their consent. So I remember in a charity working with someone who, ex beneficiary was now volunteering with the charity, was at uni. I used to work late. She used to ask me for help on her essays. That's kind of how we got a bit of a friendship going. And I asked her to look at something I was doing on their data model. And she suddenly went, would you have this data on me? I'm like, maybe it might have been deleted because you have to what about. But yeah, of course, this data was collected each time you had a key working session. She kind of went, I didn't know that. And that was quite a light bulb moment for me, because there will have been a consent form. There was, I know there was. Like, there will have been a process where that consent was gathered. But when you've got that power dynamic, I don't know how meaningful it was. And there's just something really interesting about remembering that often when you're dealing with data about very vulnerable people, they may not actually know really that you are using that data on them. And so just that reminder of, firstly, any database you create can be used for purposes that you didn't intend it to be. Think about the Dreamers data in the US. And yeah, just that just remembering that thing that actually people, especially when there's a disparity of power, won't always have actually gone into that with the kind of fully informed consent that we might want them to. And just kind of remembering that in our work and ensuring that we're always only ever using just enough data, and we're only ever really doing research and monitoring and evaluation where it's actually going to drive an impact that is a justifiable use of that data, whether or not you have like a legal basis. So that's kind of my final thought there. I think I was given 10, 12 minutes to speak and then time for questions, so I might hold fire. But if there's any kind of thought, idea that's sparked, let's just discuss it. Great.
That was perfect. Thank you very much, Gaia. Do we have questions?
Yeah, I love your point about data heroes' importance. Is it okay? Yeah, I love your point of how data heroes are important, but there's something that needs to happen for the rest of the organization to come up. How do you bridge that gap?
It's a really good question. So I can think of various routes. You need the executive on board. Something that I've learned as quite a hard lesson in my career, really early on, where I developed this kind of digital social prescribing tool. If the executive doesn't fundamentally want the organization to do that thing, it won't. You can run a pilot, you can get some funding in, but there's always a stage in any project where you need like a kind of, there's a bit of the valley of death idea, like you need some sort of push. If the executive isn't behind it, it's just not going to happen. So there's something about thinking about, is there executive will? So I sit on a trustee board at the Samaritans. The Samaritans has done some amazing work to digitize its services over the past 8-10 years, and now has data and evidence as one of the pillars of its new strategy. That took 3 successive boards really believing in that and putting money into that. So there's something about like the executive there. I think there's something about proving worth. So there's something about moving away from being a data evangelist to ensuring that what you're doing actually meets the strategy of the organization. So when you drive a data strategy, your number one question has to be, how might data best serve the strategic objectives of the organization? It always will, but if you can't find a link between what that organization is there to do and the data, you're in the wrong place, right? So I think there's that as well. And then I think there's a distinction between the grunt work and some shiny baubles. Everyone likes a bauble. Give them a bauble, right? The fun project, the predictive model, oh, I've just saved you however much money. But just remember that in the meantime, you need to be doing the steps to actually having a data strategy. So is there a process in place to actually ensure that your data basics are right? You know, do you have like core data models? Do you have an agreement of how you're saving data? Is that across organizational? Next step up, do you even have the capabilities for what you're trying to do? Because if not, it's not going to work. Now, is there data governance? Is there a data board? Is somebody that's ultimately responsible? It's kind of an incremental process. And I think, you know, if you're brand new as a data analyst into an organization, you're not necessarily going to solve that, but you can ask some really basic questions that link your data to what's come before. So I used to do a lot of survey design, and I've always been really surprised by people not just asking basic questions like, are we using census categories? Like, are we using categorization of the data that we used before? Are we using fields that are used elsewhere? So I think there is something about knitting yourself into the existing data system that gives you longevity, but ultimately you need a strategy, which is often a pyramid if anyone's wondering why I'm doing that. Often data strategies are represented as pyramids. Often strategies are represented as pyramids. I don't know why. Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I was also wondering, like you mentioned before, of how teams need to speak more with each other. So people who are not necessarily like data science savvy need to understand the system to create a more decentralized organization. And I was wondering if you've seen or have thought of any like good kind of like communication strategies or organization structures that could kind of foster this more communication between people who are kind of like data savvy and not so data savvy to bridge this gap.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you what I've tried. So at Parkinson's, we had data champions, and the data champions weren't necessarily data people. They just cared about data, which is often a route in because they talk to people who don't care about data. And then we often shared examples that were about data and health, let's say, that they were just like interesting stories. So I think my post that had the most engagement on like the Yammer, it's like an intranet, was this woman who created a musical piece based on data that her friend had gathered about a child's illness. It's nicer than it sounds. So basically, these 2 women working together, and basically, if I remember rightly, one woman who was obviously quite data inclined had a daughter with like a condition, like a long-term limiting condition, and she created this beautiful way of representing the condition where like different brushstrokes were like good and bad days. So it was almost like a visual representation of data, and then her friend created like music that went with it and followed this kind of visual, and like that just really resonated. You know, these are people who work in health. They know what it's, you know, like it really resonated with them, and it, you know, it didn't solve a fundamental problem, but it started a conversation on data. Another thing that I think has worked elsewhere is communities of practice. So similar idea. So again, you bring people together who have a common interest, you give them common tools, language, somewhere often to meet, often works quite well. But again, I think when you're thinking about a big organization, you kind of need like buy-in from senior leadership to cascade the information. So it's unless you are like responsible for the transformation process, it's unlikely that you will have it in your gift to engender all of that. But I think just thinking about data storytelling, thinking about why that person should care. Like I think when you really get into data, often it's like, look at this cool thing, and they're like, great. What is it doing for me, right? And I think it's just thinking about what are the problems that you're solving with it that kind of gets people on side. Because actually, you know, if you can automate a process for them or like answer a question they have, great, right? And there's something I think really in show and tell as well, just actually showing how you've done something. You have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Gaia. So I'm Valerie. I'm one of the project managers here. But coming from the industry perspective and also from doing like DSSG, I am really curious to know how an organization that maybe like right now they're at 0, how do they go from 0 to 1? And what are some easy, low-hanging fruit sort of steps that they can take? And maybe what is a reasonable timeline for them? Because I love your vision, but I also think, wow, how do we get there? What's the first few things we should
That's a
do?
great question.
Thank you.
So there's a model which I think has gone out of fashion, but I like it, so I'm going to use it. So there's the idea of a data maturity assessment. So you look across the organisation, and it's something we did at Parkinson's UK. There are various models. There's a public sector specific one that I think was on the local government website. Data Orchards have a public charity sector, that's the one version. And I think it kind of, it goes from kind of data are unknown through to data are fully utilised. And you'll have like a number of axes around like your data systems, the way data is stored, your governance, your capabilities, all the various like essentially the strands of a data strategy. And it just gives you a way of segmenting where you are, but also where you want to be. So something that I did with Parkinson's is when I looked at the data maturity assessment, it's 1 to 5, not every department needed to be at 5, right? Like if I got the people doing casework off writing on an Excel sheet in their car at the end of the shift and then some poor sod trying to pull it together on SharePoint, win, right? So I think there is something about just enough data and also just enough spend, right? When you talk, especially when you talk about the charity sector, we're cash poor. You don't want to have like some Rolls Royce system that doesn't actually meet the needs of the organization. So I think it's that case of really understanding like if you want essentially your data to be accessible, trusted, and I mean, those are the main things actually. Available. There's an acronym there, but I've forgotten it. Are your data stored in a way that frankly makes sense? Like, does anyone trust the data? Are the data accessible to the people that need one? And if you've hit those criteria, that's kind of good enough. And like what a good enough process is will vary at the stage of maturity of the organization and what it's doing with the data. Yeah, go for it.
So kind of similar, like I can speak loud. Yeah, kind of like similar question, I guess. Like, who do you find is generally catalyzing these changes within businesses? So, you know, if you need to get the CEO on the side or the other, or the executive, how does that, like, other than your participation, like, how does that actually happen? And, you know, if we join as a, you know, data hero or whatever, and we see that that isn't the case, do we have the means to change that, or how long should we wait before doing as you did and basically saying, actually, you know,
yeah,
it would be better to just drop the mic and head off?
That's a really good question. So thinking back to like various organizations, often the idea does come from the executive of the board. Like it costs money to bring people in, right? So somebody will have decided that it's in a strategy or in their vision or something. There are other organizations that do basic data work because it's just part of like the requirements for the organization. So you think of a housing charity, they have to have some sort of data team because the way that you get funding, you have, you know, you're responsible for children or young people, so or adults, depending on the housing. So you need to like know where they are, who they are you giving them interventions? There'll then be conditions from your, so there'll just be a duty of care there. So you'll have to have some sort of database. There'll then be conditions from your funders. So you'll have to have some sort of system. And then someone will need to do reporting because someone will ask for something. And then like what often happens is you realize that there are 4 different reporting systems because it's based on funding models. And at some point someone goes, it might actually be cheaper if we paid someone to sort this out instead of just putting in data. So that's one approach. That's, I think, the bottom up approach. And there, I think people often just make business cases and like make the argument, and that does work. That can happen. And then I think there's often the kind of top down. Someone has a big vision of you. Often it can be driven by funding. So someone goes through a random bid and it's like, oh God, we have to do that now. I've definitely been in an organization that did that. So I don't think there's one way in. And I think, you know, if you're in an organization, it really depends whether you're getting what you need from that organization. You know, first data science job, as long as you have the remit to do good work and it probably doesn't matter. I think in terms of driving change, I mean, that's with any change, it's you find your allies and you convince them and you make cases and you write papers and you have chats with people and you find out who else kind of thinks the same as you. Like that's often how it does. And normally in organizations, you have inflection points where there's like a new strategy being written or a big thing happening where you can start inserting those ideas. But change is rarely linear. There are a million ways to kind of win hearts and minds. But I wouldn't leave an organization just because it doesn't have a strategy unless it's actively holding you back. So actually, somewhere with a load of messy data, it's probably quite a good place to play for a bit. But then I think when you get to the point where you really want to know that you're driving impact, maybe that's when you're like, actually, I need somewhere with a bit more data maturity. I need somewhere where I really got the remit and the ownership and the authority to kind of drive change.
Okay, thank you very much again, Gaia, for all these immensely valuable insights. Thanks a lot. Right, so we are getting close to hearing more about this year's project, but before we get there, I want to have a short recap on last year. As you know, we've been running DSSG for 4 years now, and I would like to give the floor briefly to Amit Kohli, one of last year's technical mentors, to talk about one of the projects that he mentored last year. So, Amit.
Perfect. So, it was something that we did with the, I'll handle it here. It was done with the Superintendency of the Environment in Chile. And basically it was done by, the fellows were Colin, Henri, and Ling, and it was myself as the technical mentor. The project manager was Dutchman, people that you don't know, but they were really lovely people. Anyway, that's Chile. The SMA was responsible for gathering information about environmental complaints from citizens. The way that it worked was there would be several offices located in strategic locations in the country, and people could go to these locations and make a complaint about something like sound complaints, or maybe a mine was contaminating in a way they weren't supposed to, or they saw some funny water, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, as you could imagine, every citizen can go to one of these offices. They don't necessarily have the time working, it's difficult to get time off, et cetera, et cetera. So they realized that they were having difficulty gathering information from all of the people, right? So they did something really smart and they put it online, and now anybody could submit any complaint that they wanted online. What do you think happens when you do that? Something like that. Yeah, they say a Chinese curse is, I hope you're successful in what you want. I don't know if that's true or not, but I love that because they're now scratching their heads and saying, aha, so this is cool because we're gathering information from a whole bunch of people. The problem is, how do I find the urgent environmental complaint which might result in loss of life tomorrow, right? So that's kind of the challenge. That's the problem that we were getting into. So let's talk a little bit about what the situation was like. So you have a citizen, you have the SMA, and of course, the ideal situation is that a citizen is going to submit a complaint that is going to be relevant to this organization. Of course, people aren't perfect, so one of the other problems that we have is that they'll submit something that is relevant to another ministry. So that is something that we would call redirection. So something that, yes, we did get that complaint, but it should really be sent to, I don't know, a planning kind of a board or something. Last category that we would receive is something that they called Archivo 1, Archive 1, which is basically a complaint that is a catch-all bad complaint, either because there's not enough actionable detail, or two, it's not an actual complaint. There's no legal precedent that governs it. Missing information, didn't submit your name, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a catch-all for just something that isn't actionable. Assuming that it was relevant, the next step would be there would be an inspection that would be carried out. A legal entity would go visit, see, verify, and on the basis of that, then perhaps there would be an environmental sanction. As you could imagine, this could be, in some cases, kind of a big deal, right? So what did we do for them? Oh yeah, sorry. In case the sanction did not find something, then it would go to Archivo 2. It would be archived as, yes, there was a complaint, it was investigated, it was found to be not relevant, right? Or the complaint, either the person was ill-informed or sufficient time has passed that that complaint is no longer relevant. So what did we do? We introduced two models. The first model was a relevance model, trying to understand which of these three classes, right? So redirection, relevant, or archive one, which of these three classes is a complaint likely to be, okay? The second model was a sanction gravity model. Assuming that a complaint comes in and assuming that it is relevant to us, how bad is this? Is this going to be something that we're going to assign a high sanction to or not? Why is that important? Because the big sanctions are the ones that are typically associated with loss of life. The government uses financial burden as kind of a disincentive to contaminate. It's a blunt instrument, but it's often the only one that they had available to them. So these were the two models that we created. The data was, this is just for the data nerds, the data was structured stuff. So we knew what the organization was, when the complaint happened, et cetera, et cetera. We had free text stuff. We used some NLP, some natural language processing. The main things that we were looking at were just what are the main classes in the topics and what are the main classes in the TF-IDF. So which terms were weighted most importantly in each of these classes. And we kind of use that to say, okay, well, are any complaints known to be one of these things? And that's kind of how we did it. We also had some geographical stuff about population, et cetera, et cetera. Main thing about the geographical stuff was, is this in an area that we know has other problems, right? So what did they do? The idea is take a look and identify the key things. We asked them what they thought the estimated impact would be. They said they thought that it would lead to an 80% reduction in time for redirecting, 85% reduction to archive the complaints, and 65% reduction in time for complaints with sanction potential to get inspected. That's what they said way back when. Now, after the DSSG, well, during the DSSG, and then for some time afterwards, we spent some time actually developing this. So taking things from DSSG and actually building this infrastructure within their cloud environment, teaching them how to use this, developing tools with them, kind of powering them through this process so that they could then take this on forward. So this is deployed to their cloud. And now fast forward to today, which was a little time later. And how cool would it be if I tell you in this next slide, you know, everything happened that they thought would happen. Their dreams, they just were realized, and all the models predicted exactly the way that we thought. Yeah, that's not necessarily the case, but let's take a look at what happened a year on. So the model is deployed, and it is under observation. It is not built into their pipeline, and I'll talk about why in a couple of seconds from now. But the idea that it is deployed, that it is in their cloud, that it is operational, gives them, but the analysts that were previously doing the tagging don't know that. What does that do? It creates this. It creates the option to see what the actual data is doing as opposed to the analysts, right? So the model versus the analysts. I'm going to explain what this is in a second. This is going to get super nerdy for a second, so I'm going to try to keep it as unnerdy as possible. This is called a confusion matrix. How technical are people? Like from like a 3? think there's like a 3.5 average in the rule. Okay. So this is called a confusion matrix. And what we use this for is to figure out what the is, right? So what is real versus what is predicted. And ideally, these numbers are going to be very high, and all of these other numbers are going to be very low, because that means that things that were Archivo 1 in reality were predicted by the model to be Archivo 1 as well, right? So you want these numbers in the diagonal to be high and everything else to be kind of low. Is that clear? Would anyone say no? No, that's not clear. So they took these numbers and they converted them into percents, right? And what they did was they plotted this diagonal, and that's what we saw here. Look at this, because it's super interesting. This is, by the way, this is just the first model, the relevance model. So I took the, yeah, this is really crappy, but I cut this and I put it here so that you could see it better. But yeah, these are the three classes of the relevance model. And again, Archivo 1 is things that are kind of the complaints that are not very useful. Derivación means that they were sent to another ministry, and relevante is relevant. It's a difficult one. So as you can see, the green series was predicting and has continued to predict fairly well, fairly consistently. We have an accuracy, it's not really accuracy, but it's an accuracy-ish of about 80%, just kind of, and staying stable around there. The relevant classification, we were predicting at an 80%, and this dropped over time, right? This dropped over time, and that really sucks because relevant is what we want. We want the complaints that are relevant to this organization. I'm going to talk about that in 2 seconds. What is super interesting that I have no idea what's going on is that Archivo 1 is getting more accurate on unseen data. So let's talk about that one in a second, but most importantly, let's talk about why relevante is going down. There's several reasons why you'll see model accuracy going down. Number one, because you screwed it up and you overfit the model at the very beginning, right? And then when you're hitting it with data that is unseen, the model is performing less and less and less well. We controlled and we tried to do the best job that we did to prevent what's called data leakage from actually coming in here and making this a problem. Of course, the problem that we knew we were going to happen, that we knew we were going to have early on, is the fact that the population is changing, because now you're capturing data online. There are people that never ever complained that are now all of a sudden complaining. You're receiving complaints on topics that you had no idea were a problem, because back in paper, you would never see that. So this is an unknown problem that we knew we were going to have. So we actually knew that they weren't going to put this into production. We knew that they were going to continue kind of evaluating this. And we were expecting the performance to drop just, well, I was hoping it wasn't going to drop, right? Like, I didn't want it to drop, but we knew that it was going to drop a little bit. So that is actually okay. And that is one of the reasons why they weren't exactly ready to implement this into production just yet. We were kind of trying to understand what is going on. Now, how can we solve the problem of this? How can we solve the problem of data screwing up the model because there's new data that we didn't see? I'll let you guys think about it for about 5 seconds. Now, think about it in your own head. Anyway, but yes. You can reapply the models, right? You can retrain the models. And that is why one of the things that we did was we actually left them with all the infrastructure, all the tools, all the documentation so that they could use everything that we did. They're just going to do exactly what we did. Again, they're going to retrain the data and see what that looks like and then continue to monitor. The weird part none of us was expecting was that Archivo 1, the complaints that are useless, is increasing in accuracy. That I have no idea what's going on. Now, also, I do want to comment on the fact that the reason why this complaint was very difficult to predict, a very low prediction, is because this is a catch-all category, right? There's no one thing that makes a complaint a bad complaint. It can be a bad complaint because someone just put A, and submitted that. It can also be because I didn't put my name. It can also be an excellent complaint and I didn't put any company, or I said a company's doing something bad, but there's no legal precedent for me to persecute them, right? So it's trying to catch so much variety of things. If we wanted to fix that problem, then we could issue additional categories to why the complaint is bad. But as you can imagine, doing this tagging is money, right? It's staff time. The industry is not going to spend time tagging why things are they're useless. They're useless. So we knew that that was going to be a low quality. But why is that increasing? Now, the last thing that I want to say about this is that if you take a look at the red and the blue lines together, they do create something which we like to call tendency to the mean. When data, as time goes by, it kind of tends to normalize out. That does tend to be a pattern of data. I have no idea why we would be seeing that pattern here. So if anyone has any idea of what's going on, I would really like to, yeah, I'm not kidding, like they're curious and I'm curious too. I have no idea what's going on. But that's the way the data is sometimes, right? So the one thing that is salvageable about this is the green line does appear to be performing fairly stably. So one thing that they could do, and they are thinking about doing, is deploying just a portion of this model that is just predicting whether whether this complaint should be redirected to somebody else, right? So just that piece, that could be perfectly well leveraged. Now, they're thinking about, they were thinking about doing that. I don't think that they're going to do that directly. So they're not going to put this model into production, but they are going to use that as an example to show that there is AI, that it is able to predict fairly accurately, and let people say, well, why can't we automate this? So that, again, goes to Gaia's point, right? If we wanted to be superstars, we could come in and we could say, hey, you guys, we can do your job better than you, and we can do it for free. And in a virtual machine, it's wonderful. Or we show the technology, we say, there's some problems with quality, and let someone in a team say, you could help us by putting this into production. Oh, well, we could probably do that. Would that be useful to you? And now all of a sudden we have engagement because it's somebody else's idea too. So what else are they thinking about doing? Yeah, so they are going to retrain the model on new data. They are going to be doing that at the end of this year. And yeah, basically just using the same infrastructure and approach. And again, you know, I'm just going to keep saying, like, just like Gaia said, for everything, because she's right. But indeed, if we hadn't taken the time during the team meeting to teach them, to bring them along, to show them what we do, to co-build with them, to say, what capacity does your Azure person have? Okay, bring our Azure person here. Do you know what just in time is? Okay, well, come in, bring everybody. You know, just transfer that capacity. Now, all of a sudden, they're in a position where they can take this model and continue. And if we hadn't done that, this would have been an excellent exercise that we did in DSSG. There would be a very beautiful, shiny brochure, and this would be gone, right? So move slowly sometimes, right? They say move fast. If you want to move fast, go alone. If you want to move far, go together, right? So co-training is very, very important. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Amit. Thank you.
Pass this on.
Great. So yeah, I think it's really great to hear about where these projects go. I mean, we have this 12-week period that is very intense, but obviously we want to create lasting impact and we want to see where these projects go. Now we come to the highlight. I mean, these are all great talks that we had, and I think we already learned a lot. But we want to hear, of course, what have we done this year? What have the fellows achieved? There will be 4 talks, one for each of the 4 projects that we did this year. And there will not be time for question, but the idea is that after these talks, we invite you to the reception outside, and the fellows will have posters there, and you can ask any questions that you like in detail at these posters and discuss with them. So I give the floor to the first speaker, Abhijit.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. This summer, I was part of a team that was focused on identifying students at risk of becoming not in education, employment, or training. or NEET for short. As part of our project, we worked together with two partners, Buckinghamshire Council, a local authority in England, and the EY Foundation, an independent charity supporting young people. Focusing on Buckinghamshire, they came to us with an interesting problem. The county is a fairly affluent county with good schools and high test scores. However, there are a significant number of students who end up NEET or with an unknown status, meaning the council cannot contact the student anymore. Students who become NEET are prone to other issues later in life, such as mental health issues, financial hardship, or general poor quality of life. The big question from the council is how can we effectively use the data that they've collected to identify students who are at high risk of becoming NEET and give them support before that happens. So what did we do? We took the council's data and we applied machine learning to develop a risk score. Using this risk score, the council can prioritize students for support that have higher risk. In addition, our trained models can identify different factors that are affecting a particular student's risk. Using this information, councils and schools can provide more personalized intervention for their students, depending on what factors are really strongly increasing their risk. Before we actually built our own model, we investigated other tools already in use. Manchester County uses the RONI tool. RONI is a simple scoring system that assigns weights to different risk factors, and then it sums them up to measure a student's risk. So roughly in Buckinghamshire County every year, there are about 50 NEET students. If we looked at how the RONI tool did, it would identify about 31 students before they became NEET. In contrast, the model that we built would identify modest 33 students, gain of about 2 students. However, the big difference between RONI and our model is in the number of false positives. Student is a false positive if RONI flags them as NEET, but they actually end up staying EAT. As you can see, RONI flags many, many students that are actually EAT, in fact, over 300 in a single year. In contrast, our model cuts that down by half, saving valuable time and resources. So in summary, our model flags more students that actually end up NEET than the RONI tool. We flag about half the number of students that don't actually end up NEET, and this is going to save valuable operational costs and time for both the council and schools. But opening the black box of our model, we also took a look at what were the most important risk indicators in Buckinghamshire for students who become NEET. The biggest one was that they had a medium level of support. Second was they had a large number of absences, whether they had mental health issues previously, whether they had unauthorized absences that had no clear reason, and whether they were a parent. The most interesting one here is actually that first one, whether they had a medium level of support. You'll notice that both intensive support and little support didn't actually show up as one of the top 5 factors. This seems to suggest that students who are flagged as needing support, medium support, are maybe not getting all the support that they need. Building a machine learning model is not really all that useful if we can't effectively communicate it to the end users. To do this, we integrated with the council's current infrastructure and built a Power BI dashboard. On this dashboard, we included a heat map of the different areas in Buckinghamshire County that have a high rate of high-risk students. Using this information, the council can target their support to those particular communities that have very high risk. In addition, we developed a prioritized list of students with high risk scores, and that could be filtered by school. In addition, the council can drill down on particular students to try to understand why they are at risk. Using this, they can give this information to different schools, and schools can use this information combined with their the present knowledge about the student to give more personalized intervention. Finally, we created a prioritized list of students with an unknown status that the council cannot currently contact. And using this information, the council can then prioritize contact with those particular students who are most likely to be NEET. Going forward from here, we hope foremost that the council can use this tool to help identify students who are at high risk of being NEET now and for the next year's cohort. In addition, we have open sourced our code to drive adoption by other local authorities and hopefully be able to apply this tool to the rest of the UK. Every year, there are about 31,000 students who become NEET in the UK. Using our tool could help identify about 4,200 more students than Warni tool, helping improve the educational system here. My name is Abhijit, and my teammates are Rachel, Pranjus, Vanshika, Satyam, and Mihir. We're happy to take your questions in the poster session immediately after. Thank you for your time.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, you all. Happy to see you here. My name is Alina, and this summer our team worked with St. Basil's on improving services for homeless youth in the UK. St. Basil's is the UK-based organization focused on helping youth that are at risk of homelessness to prevent this homelessness, build their confidence, develop their skills, and find a home for them. Imagine you're working in the front desk of the organization who helps homeless young people. It is your first day at work, and your task is to assign the support hours to the incoming people. So you open the doors to your homeless shelter and you see two young people needing help. The first one is Emma. She is a 17-year-old mother with a baby in her hands. She comes from an abusive family, and her parents do not want her and her baby at home anymore. Moreover, she has her final exams and needs to finish school this year. The second person is Noah. He's a 20-year-old man with physical disabilities. His father was drunk driving a car and got into the accident, and because of that, Noah will not recover any time in the future, and his father just shuts the doors of his home for Noah. You will be to provide help to both of those people, but the problem is that you have only one trained counselor, which has only 4 hours of available time left per week. So the question is, how do you define who needs more support, who needs more help, and how do you distribute this available time among these two people? This is the more simplified problem that organizations who help homeless youth face. The more realistic problem sounds like that. You have 80 young people, you have 50 hours of counseling support available per week, you have 7 life skill modules, 16 rooms available for 10 weeks. 3 of these young people cannot be placed together because of behavioral issues. And your question is, how do you distribute your support so it has the most impact? Young people experiencing homelessness in the UK, and 8,500 of them are experiencing homelessness in West Midlands. Among those who are in the West Midlands, we want to help as many of them as we can, considering that we have limited resources. And because all the people have different care needs, we want to identify how complex the case is, and in order to allocate the support that we have and to provide the help that each person actually needs. So there is a need for a metric to quantify the severity of issues of each person, and introduce a complexity score of high, medium, and low, which will allow to personalize support for the incoming youth and identify complex. Complexity score is the relative complexity of the case, which is defined as the amount of support needed for the young person to achieve positive outcome in 3 areas, which is accommodation, employment, education, or training. This STAR score, which is the internal metrics that St. Basil's uses. So we have 4 types of inputs, including the young person's background, which is their age, their nationality, the area where they come from, the presence of medical issues, and some other variables that we have. We use 3 models to predict the 3 interim variables, which are later combined into the complexity score. We also use causal inference application to assess the effect of support on the likelihood of positive outcome. And this causal inference application and the 3 models that we developed flow into the dashboard with visuals and explanations. Not only is the complexity score displayed, but also the plots which show the relationship between the probability of positive outcome in any of these 3 areas that I mentioned, and between different support types. So let's take a look at one of these plots, for example. This plot shows how the probability of accommodation outcome depends on the time dedicated for the young person per support session. We clearly can see the elbow here. It's the area where the line becomes less steep. And basically what it means, like this light is on the 30 minutes. It shows like the likelihood of 30 minutes. And it means that this number of minutes of support session is the optimal time. And the optimal time is basically means the time when we consider the trade-off between the limited counseling hours, like limited resources, and the highest marginal utility. These all plots have basically the same logic behind them, but they provide us with different insights. And we'll be glad to share those insights later on when we show you the post and the dashboard. Now, when you have this dashboard, if you are at the front desk at St. Basil's, for example, you'll be able to easily distribute the amount of support hours that you have between Emma and Noah, and they both will have the support they actually need. So, because we have this complexity score that allows us to identify complex cases more early and to personalize the help that young people need, the homelessness rates in the UK have the potential to be reduced even further. By showing the power of data, we encourage the organizations to digitalize their processes and start to collect data more precisely. And we also have the open source code, which we hope will encourage trust and transparency among the stakeholders and will help other organizations who want to see their effect on the homelessness. My name is Alina, and this summer I worked with Hannah, Ariane, Valerie, and me here on improving services for homeless youth in the UK. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll be glad to see you at the poster session.
Yeah. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lillian, and today we'll be presenting about the project that I did together with my team this summer. And I think for this summer, one thing that we can all agree is that it was very hot. It was extremely hot, just like it was last year and the year before that, and every year it's just getting hotter. It's getting so hot that we're desensitized to the fact that climate change is here, it's happening, and that we need to do something about it. And this summer, we are really fortunate to be working with two partners whose aims are to combat climate change. Specifically, we were working with the West Midlands Combined Authority, a collection of local councils in the West Midlands, whose goal is to achieve 100% carbon neutrality by 2041, and Pure Leapfrog, a business-led charity whose goal is to combat climate change in a socially inclusive way. So they came to DSSG with a proposal. Their aim was to increase the energy efficiency and reduce the amount of non-renewable energy used by houses in the West Midlands and hopefully for the rest of the UK. And maybe you're wondering, why are we focusing on houses? Why not any other sector? Well, according to the National Housing Federation, all the total houses in the UK produce more carbon emissions than the total number of cars. This means that we can effectively cut down carbon emissions if we also focus our energy on cutting down carbon emissions from houses itself. Maybe you're wondering, as a homeowner or as somebody who can do something about my house, what can I do? You might have seen something like this if you've recently bought or rented your house. This is called an energy performance certificate. I've seen this in my dorm room. It's stuck on the wall somewhere. And what this basically means is that an A grade represents a high energy efficient home. G grade represents a home which is low in energy efficiency. It doesn't just tell you how energy efficient your home is, it also gives you specific recommendations for what you can do to your homes to make it more energy efficient. For example, you could double glaze your windows to prevent heat from escaping during the winter. Install solar panels so that you use not renewable energy resources. You could insulate your loft, you could decommission your chimney. There's a host of things that you could do, and this just scratches the surface. And if we already knew all of this information, we'd be able to come up with a strategy for how exactly we can help retrofit all the homes to make them energy efficient. But is that out of the 1.2 million homes in the West Midlands, we only have data for 40% of them. This means that local councils and even homeowners are at a loss on what to do for where the homes are, which have low energy efficiency. Oops. What sorts of interventions should be applied? What kinds of retrofitting strategies are best suited to each home? What are the costs? What are the budgets that local authorities should set aside? What are the costs that homeowners should expect to pay? What are the implications? If all of the houses were to switch from non-electric to electric heating, would the power grid be able to take this shift? If we suddenly installed solar panels on a ton of houses, would we have the labor required for it? And this is not to mention other implications that we haven't even thought about. And this is exactly the problem that we're trying to help the West Midlands solve. We've taken data from a host of licensed and open source platforms and tried to put it together to form 3 key actionable insights. First, predicted the EPC ratings for the remaining 60% of homes in the West Midlands using a random forest and similarity quantification model. Secondly, we estimated the solar panel output for all of these houses. Basically, if you wanted to know how much solar panel output your house can give out, you need to know what is the slope of your roof, what direction does that face towards the sun, what kind of shading is on that roof that will impact the kind of solar energy that would get onto it. And we've used remote sensing data to be able to figure out all of these figures. Lastly, we figured out a prediction for what heating types do houses use. Are they using electric? Are they using non-electric? And if we were to switch them to electric, what kind of additional load would that pose on the energy grid? Then we put all of these insights into a place where you can kind of see all of it. 3D model of the city. We've given you a 5 kilometer square kind of like sample in Wolverhampton, where the darker green spots represent areas with high energy efficiency and the darker red spots represent areas with low energy efficiency. So if I was a local council and I said, okay, maybe I want to target this area circled in blue, and I wanted to install electric heating in this area, what would the impact be? They could overlay this graph with a different graph that shows the additional peak load, be able to aggregate this data to see what the additional load would be on the substation and say, okay, maybe this is a good plan, maybe this is not. And imagine being able to do this with all sorts of different insights that we've pulled together. As you can see, there's huge potential for long-term impact with the work that we have done. One of them being helping local councils and other climate-focused organizations to identify areas where retrofitting can be applied. Secondly, being able to account for other key considerations, not just what kind of retrofitting strategies, but also the other things that are important to making this decision equitable. This project is scalable to all other UK city councils and climate-focused organizations because we use licensed and public data, which is available for all of them. And our code, like all of the projects, is open source. I could not have done this without the help of Meghna, Mike, and Shreya, and our project manager Satyam, our technical mentor Mihir, and also the support of all the other organizations within DSSG. We hope that through this project, we'll be able to combat climate change together. And if you have any questions, please talk to us during our poster session later. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Well, thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Daniela. This summer, Marina, Arpita, John, and I work alongside UNICEF and Save the Children to predict and develop microestimates of multidimensional child poverty in West Africa. So first, a little bit of context. 1 billion children are living in multidimensional poverty, child poverty. This means that 1 billion children have restricted access to services such as nutrition, health, and education. Furthermore, 356 million children live under extreme child poverty. This means that they live with $1.9 or less a day. The impacts of child poverty are both short-term and long-term. In the short term, children living under child poverty are 2 times likelier to die during childhood as opposed to their wealthier peers. Even more so, in the long run, children that develop in impoverished environments are more likely to not develop skills needed for the workforce and even more so receive and earn lower wages. Thus, given that this is a problem, what should we as a community, and more importantly, policymakers and NGOs and governmental authorities do to tackle this problem? First, it is important to locate or identify the special distribution of child poverty across the world. Next, aside from simple traditional economical approaches to measure child poverty, we should adopt a more multidimensional approach, which derives into assessing their access to sanitation, to education, nutrition, water, shelter, and health. Even more importantly, we should start measuring both the proportion of children deprived within a specific region, which is also known as prevalence, and perhaps more importantly, also assess the severity or the number of dimensions each child is lacking. So, of course, we are no experts in poverty and more specifically child poverty, but our partners, Save the Children and UNICEF, are organizations that have long been working with this problem and have developed a lot of studies into understanding what are the key drivers of child poverty to better allocate scarce resources and eventually to raise awareness onto this problem and eliminate child poverty. So thanks to their long time work, our partners have identified that to effectively deliver policy and tackle these critical child decision policies, one should count with finely grained data. It is important that to collect this finely grained data, it is cheap, precise, and also feasible. However, current methods of collection are neither cheap, precise, or feasible. Thus, here's where we come in place. Propose a solution to create a finely grained data through machine learning predictions, and then we estimate the distribution of child poverty within West Africa. How do we go about this? There are three main components. First, what is our ground truth? Our ground truth derives from the DHS or Demographics and Health Service program. Next, we have to think about how highly how the resolution was going to be in regards to our problem. Here we had to tackle two specific problems. One, we don't want to we wanted to have like highly resoluted data that could help policymakers, but not too resoluted as to not go and have privacy issues. Next, as a proof of concept, though we would like to tackle and generate predictions for all low and middle income countries, we started as a proof of concept with West Africa. Then, thanks to spatial markers in the service we use as our ground truth, we were able to link this to special input data that are traditionally not used to tackle these problems, such as satellite images. We also use connectivity data that come both from Facebook and different sources related to cell tower. We also have topographical data, economic variables that prove to be important in our modeling, demographic information, and critical infrastructure. We then took all of this data and through different machine learning models, we predicted two main target variables, which are the prevalence and severity of child poverty. Our output, aside from being just point estimates, are also prediction intervals, which help and promote responsible downstream use of data. We also validated our data against state-level data results that give much more confidence of our estimations. Of course, though the main objective of this project is to give open access to this data, we also delivered a dashboard that is interactive and can help to produce insights as to how the distribution of child poverty is across West Africa. So what are the expected impacts of our product? First, we would like that our partners, such as UNICEF and Save the Children, can have and monitor better child poverty across the world. Next, we hope to promote dialogue among experts and experts and researchers. And finally, like all the products developed in the project, we hope that because our data is of open access, it can be reproduced, and also because the code is open, it could be scalable to other organizations. But perhaps more importantly, our project would contribute to is give deprived children more visibility to data and direct awareness about child poverty. My name is Daniela, and our team is formed by Arpita, Jam, Marina, Valerie, and me here. We hope to see you later out at a poster.
Wow. Thank you very much, the 4 presenters, but all the 15 fellows who did an amazing job in just 12 weeks. So this concludes our presentations. We are heavily overrunning anyway, but I hope you agree that it was definitely worth it. We now invite you to join us for a reception in the foyer where the fellows will present posters, and you can bombard them with questions and learn more about the great work that they have done this summer. Also, please talk to either myself or Colin Connaughton, who is sitting over there in the back, as 2 of the DSSG organizers. If you want to learn more about data science for social good and maybe want to participate in DSSG in the future, either as a future partner or as a technical mentor or project manager or fellow, or if you want to support DSSG financially or in some other way, we would be very glad to talk to you. If you want to stay in touch, you can find us on the internet, warwick.ac.uk/DSSGx, or you can simply email us at dssg@wbs.ac.uk. So thank you very much for joining today, and please enjoy the poster session. Thank you.